Hey folks, welcome to the Bass Shed Podcast. My name is Ryan Roberts. Alright, what's going on everybody? The world is in a state of absolute craziness. As I mentioned at the end of the last episode, I don't go there a lot on this podcast. This isn't a political podcast. Political podcast. It is not one of those. And so I don't go there. I don't express my views about that on this podcast. I hope that this is maybe just like a little bit of a break that I can offer. And, listen to some bass players geek out talking about whatever. So I don't talk about those things, but I'm aware of those things. And I am actually lining up some guests to open up this platform for them to talk about their experience related to those things. And I'll be releasing more information about that as those episodes get closer. On this show today, or tonight, on this episode, is longtime friend Steve Millhouse. I met Steve when he was teaching a bass clinic that I attended when I was in high school. And not too long after that, I started studying with him privately. I studied with him privately for a number of years, and they're always like just really kind of loose lessons. Like me going over there, like sometimes I'd want to work some things out, and we'd go through that process. And a lot of times it was just listening to records a lot and talking about what we were hearing. And those were some of my favorite lessons. And that's kind of a big reason why I approach education transcription based, is I think so much material is already out there to just get into the records. And so much of my fundamental kind of how my outlook on music and education is kind of goes back to some of those hangs, and those are really valuable to me, and I'm really excited to have Steve on the podcast. Steve and I, he moved to New York around the time I moved to LA. I think it was just a little bit after. And I was busy, like kind of getting my stuff together to move to LA, and I was getting married, and then I was that's where my head was at, and Steve and I didn't necessarily fall out of touch or anything, but we weren't in regular communication like we had been. And so there's a little bit of some stories there towards the end of his time in Phoenix that I wasn't aware of, and we talk about that. And actually, how the episode is going to start with his story of walking off a gig, just straight up walking off a gig, and and some things that turned into, and like then his experience in New York with playing on the Broadway scene. It was a great conversation. It was like 4 hours long, and this is the last chunk of it. Steve's going to be back on because what we had discussed in the other, 2.5 hours or 3 hours or whatever it was, he's having this custom bass built by the folks over at Federa, and he was telling me about the bass. And since I've known Steve for so long, I think he's probably had a bass of every combination of woods you can imagine. And Steve talks about the tonal qualities of each of the different woods, and some things I didn't know about that. I'm looking forward to having him back to talk about those things again. And I definitely have some new questions to ask him about it all. On the topic of basses, this is where I plug D. Lakin Basses. Dan Lakin, good friend of mine. He's working on some new designs, working on some new things happening. There's a link to the website to see what he's up to since leaving Lakeland Basses. He has started D. Lakin. I play one of his jazz basses. I'm really happy with it. There's I think like I have a version. He did change the design of his headstock, so I have one of the super early ones with the old headstock design, and there was an email. I'm like, man, I think you should definitely check this out and check that out, and he took those into consideration, and he's always looking to improve the product, and ultimately he's really always interested to talk to bass players to learn specifically what they want, and Dan Lakin is really knowledgeable about the electric bass and the construction of the electric bass. So if you're interested, shoot him an email. Say hello. Tell him you learned about him from Ryan Roberts at the Bass Shed. And he's more than happy to just kind of hang out and talk bass. and is more than happier to build you the bass you're looking for. So there's that. Yeah, like I said, conversation with Steve, fantastic. He's definitely going to be back on. And here we go. Now we're going to take a listen to Steve talking about how he walked off a gig in Phoenix, Arizona.
But yeah, I mean that was kind of the beginning of the end in Arizona. It was I went to this gig that I was told it would be inside, and I was to wear a tux and bring. I said, so it's upright bass, yes. So it's going to be inside or outside? Should I bring my good bass or my beater stuff? And it's going to be inside, no problem. So I bring my good bass. So as I'm driving to the gig, I'm already getting, I've already been more and more and more into wine.
Yeah.
The last 5 years by now, probably 4 or 5 years. I drive by this place and I was like, oh, look at that. There's a new wine bar. And I keep driving to the gig. So I was like thinking, yeah, I'll have to come back to that place at some point. So I drive out to this gig. It's out in Fountain Hills.
I remember that. It was Sacred Ground, or not Sacred Ground.
Yeah,
it was like in the
that.
back. Yeah, so
It's out there, right? But this
I remember
was
that. Yeah.
yeah. So it was out. If you remember Fountain Hills much, it's mostly like all these big, kind of big rolling hills,
Yeah.
and then somebody comes in and rapes the ground and puts a housing community on top of one of the one of the hills, and builds a new golf course in the valleys of it. So it was another one of those groundbreaking for ground raping. So I was. I drive out and I'm driving out and I'm like, there's nothing out here. I get to the end of the road at the top of this mountain and there's a tent.
Like one of those white fold out of a bag, put up little covering things.
Yeah, like a big one that maybe you got out of a truck.
Okay. Okay.
And it was like 3-sided. And then they had cocktail tables all out from the tent where they were going to have like this groundbreaking reception. And so it's windy as shit. They have the cocktail tables weighted down with sandbags so they don't blow off the mountain. And then so I back my car up, or it's like a little circle drive. So I get to the top of the thing, I pull my car, I pull it where it's facing down the mountain. And so I open the back of the car, I get my speaker cabinet out, and I take it in there and I put it on a chair, not to play on because I hate that sound, but I put it on a chair just to kind of be like, okay, I'm here. It was for whatever insert booking agency that it was in Arizona. Sure. And it happened to be the guy who owned the agency was on the gig because it was super important gig to the company, whatever. Mm-hmm. So I set my amp down. I was like, I was told this was going to be inside. And in the meanwhile, the wind is blowing and howling at the top of the mountain. Dust is blowing. And,
And you have your good bass.
And still in the car at the moment.
Right.
So.
But you're thinking that through, like, I don't.
But I'm totally thinking this. I'm thinking this like somebody lied to me again, and I'm tired of it. And so then they always had like a babysitter from the agency come there, to make sure that the gig was to talk to the client. Happened to be another bass player that we both know, mm-hmm. who admires himself to be like a player in the scene of sorts in Arizona, and so he's the babysitter on the gig, and I'm saying, well, it's generator power. I brought my Walter Woods head at the time, and I'm seeing all these things like going, like clicking all the boxes that are like no. So the guy who's the babysitter goes and talks to the people, and he comes back to me. He's like, man, it's like half an hour before the thing, and you gotta park your car down the hill and take the shuttle bus back up.
Oh, I hate that. Yeah, that's the worst.
To do the gig. And like I said, this is when everything's coming off the rails for me out there. And so he's doing this, and then something and then the cocktail tables start falling over because the wind is blowing them over.
Oh my gosh!
And it's like really gusting. The sides of the tent are blowing in, and like for something happened, and like my amp fell off the chair, and I was like, okay, that's it, I'm done.
Yeah.
And I have I hadn't put my tux on until the last second, but I had my like white shirt on and my black pants on.
Right.
So I pick up my amp and I walk it back over to my car, which is like 100 feet away, ever in plain sight. I walk it over. I put it in the back of my car where it was. I close the back and I walk around, get in the driver's door, start the car, and drive away.
Then what was the text thread that happened right after that? Like, 2 minutes later, when they're like, "Oh, what?" As soon as that moment hit for them, what was the text
because
message?
the babysitter jerk off was like really starting to become an asshole, and saying,
Did he end up playing the gig?
Well, no, he didn't have a bass.
Oh yeah.
So it ended up being a guitar and saxophone duo. So I don't know if I got any messages for a while. I mean, this was a long time ago, so
Sure.
I don't even know, what the cell phone status would have been at that time, whatever year it was. But anyway, I didn't hear about anything, or maybe I didn't get my phone out, whatever, one of the two. So as I'm driving away from this gig, and I'm like, that's it. No, I'm not going to do this horrible stuff that people ask me to do. So I'm driving back, and then I think to myself, oh, I saw that wine bar. So I pull straight into the parking lot, and I walk into the wine bar, and I sit down at the bar. There's nobody there except for the person working there. And so I look at the thing, and I ordered like, I think I ordered a bottle of wine and a cheese plate. And so after a while, she's like, what's with the tux? So then I went through the story, and her dad had been a musician and everything. And so by the time I left the wine bar that day, my phone had probably been blowing up. But I had a steady Tuesday night gig at the wine bar. And
what was the wine bar?
It was called the Wine Studio. It was on basically the cross streets, Shea and Scottsdale Road.
Okay.
It was on Shea, a little bit east of Scottsdale Road. So I ended up. I said, I said I'll play here, but I'll do my own instrumentation. And they're like, fine. So because I think I said I'd play for Food and Wine.
Sure.
Which they had no idea how much that actually translated
yeah,
to.
right.
So
it would have been cheaper for them just giving you $500
to give me $150. Yeah, it would have been easier. So because of that, they loved me. They were happy with me, and I did a bass duo. I did a friend of mine at the time was kind of like trying to get next to the upright, so he played upright, and I played my 6-string, and I worked out all. I worked out the heads to all these standards with a rootless voicing for the first time.
Okay.
So instead of me trying to mess with the solo stuff and play, my solo thing, I was working it all out where I had the melody note as the top note, and then any sustained note I had 2 or 3 notes below it, but all just the color notes of the chord, because I didn't have to play the root. So it was like all different voicings of everything, so it was really a learning experience for me to get into the harmony much more than basing everything with the root, where maybe then you could get like the 3rd and the 7th or whatever else,
Sure,
or
stacking
the melody.
it, just
Yeah,
going up.
yeah. So it basically, and also then I could have the things where the chords moved underneath, where I could use the 2nd and the 6th and all that stuff too. So it really kind of opened up a lot of the chord stuff for me. It was a great learning experience. And then if he could make it, sometimes I would play solo and just play all my solo stuff.
Sweet.
which was like a different set of material, that I had worked out. So it was great. And then I also learned a ton about wine because I got to be friends with the people there, and they were all into opening like really cool stuff, and they would be like, "Hey, we've got this open. Check this out." So I learned a lot about Bordeaux. I learned a little bit about Burgundy from them. I learned, a lot about a lot of things that. So then, later in life, another kind of base experience brought me to the wine store, and
Well, and like ultimately, a lot of everything that's happening right now in your world with the musical projects you're
pretty
investing
much
in, and
exactly,
also what you're doing, outside of music. It's that all.
yeah.
The moral of the story is walk off of casuals. I mean, I feel like we can all. That's the takeaway for all of us. Is storm off, and then life will begin to open up.
Exactly. Then
Yeah.
then your world opens up to you.
Yeah. Right,
But
right, right. And
so
your credit
yeah,
card debt goes through the roof.
exactly. So back to your original question. I didn't necessarily get into the wine business this time, which as I said was 4 years ago. Uh, I'm half owner in this wine store, but I work in the store sometimes when I'm not out on tour or whatever. Like, I was out of the country for 2 months in January and February, December, January, February. So I'm not there a lot of the times, but I've gotten to know a lot of the regular customers, and they know that I'm a musician and they know I'm out on tour. So a lot of,
Sure.
it's kind of a cool thing. They ask, they're like, "Oh, what's Steve doing?" Yeah, he's out doing this, whatever. And so then sometimes when I come back, I work a bunch of days in a row and see everybody.
That's cool.
And they're all like, want to hear about stuff. And, so it's a cool community. It's a cool bunch of people that come into the store. But when I got into the store, I didn't necessarily think, screw music, I'm done. I gotta find something else. It just kind
Right.
of, I happened to find it, and I love wine. It was for sale. The store was, and wouldn't it be cool if? And so
Right.
we little did I know. Uh, so we made it work, and we bought the store. Initially thinking like I would have like not that much involvement with it, and that I would still continue playing music full time, and do some stuff at the store. Uh, but a few months in, we had to fire the manager, or basically let him go, or make it impossible for him to stay.
Right.
Uh, and but he left on his own. But
You can't say that after with that setup. Like make it
no,
impossible
well,
to say, but he left on his own.
no, well, I mean, it was we hired him at the deal that the previous owner had with him, and
Okay.
we realized very quickly that was completely impossible, and so because the other guy wasn't didn't need to make money or even break even on the store, which he wasn't doing either necessarily by the time that we bought it. It was
Sure.
hemorrhaging. It was hemorrhaging money, and
Yeah.
so we can't pay somebody a great salary when it's hemorrhaging money. It's just
Sure.
impossible.
That's part of the
So
hemorrhage.
yeah, so basically we said, here's what we can pay you, and he said, then I'm leaving. So it's fine. So
Okay.
whatever.
Sure.
So then, like 3 months into this thing that I was going to be, somewhat involved in, now I'm the full-time worker, and the only person that's doing all the tasting and buying for the store.
Okay.
So that includes a lot of things that I don't know much, or I didn't know much about, a lot of types of wines, a lot of spirits, you know, a lot of things that, like, without being in that industry, you don't necessarily know.
Sure.
So it was a lot of learning to do, and so I'm trying to, at certain times I had my own Broadway show during that time.
Okay.
So it was hard, to be at the show and to have the problems with the store and problems with staffing the store, which has been, an ongoing problem until recently. in a good place now, I think. But sometimes when I didn't have a store, I was there almost every day, and sometimes when somebody quit, I was there every day working. So it wasn't that I wanted to be away from music to do that. It just
Sure.
kind of happened that I had to be. And honestly, I think in a way, I think it was detrimental to me in the Broadway scene, because I think people are like, oh, he's doing the store now. We don't, we
Right.
need to call
He's
him.
got something else going on. Yeah.
Exactly. So I really feel like it was detrimental in that way.
Isn't it so funny? Like, just within, I think probably any music scene, how people just make your decisions for you. Like,
Right.
like when I moved to the West Side, like, there's definitely, I know for a fact, dudes don't call me because, like, he won't come all this way. Like, he won't. How do you know, man? Call me. Like, I'm not doing anything else. Like, he won't. Like, everybody's just making your decisions for you. Like, dude,
Right.
no. It's like, no. Like, no, I'd want to. Like, it gives me a reason to go that way. I can, like, stop in, see some friends while I'm over there. Like, I can make a day out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
I would love a gig over there, so that I can, have like kind of a reason.
Gives you a reason to go do your thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So yeah, I mean, I mean, the same kind of thing. Exactly. I feel like, I think it hurt, like, me getting calls for things. But like in retrospect, like I said, maybe it gives me more time to, like, plan on the stuff that I want to do. But
Sure.
Oh,
go ahead.
no, I still I still have have gotten calls to sub on some shows. I just haven't gotten my own show, but it's been like maybe 3 years or something like that. But I had kind of a run of 5 shows that were my own, for a while there. So, and hopefully again, I wouldn't certainly turn it down. I would
Sure.
like to do it again. Especially now that the store is more under control, it would be easier to do that.
Right.
I had to take a lot of time off of my last show, and I think that was a thing that was detrimental as well. You can take 50% off of a
Yeah, I
Broadway.
think you had told me that before, which is pretty
It's pretty
cool.
It's pretty
Pretty
amazing,
cool.
but
Now, do you
but
know the full run? Do they tell you what, like, okay, we've been contract for 9 months, so that like, all right, I got so many weeks
no,
that I'm cool.
no, it's basically it's the when this show starts, it starts and it's open ended with the hope of it running like Lion King.
Sure.
And then
Is that still going?
it is, yeah.
Oh, wow.
With the hope of it, or Phantom, like, so with the hope of it running forever.
Yeah.
And then usually there's never really an end date, and occasionally there's something where that goes into a theater that may be empty until a certain date, and then they do like a limited run of something. And so
Okay.
that occasionally happens, the limited run. But usually when a show opens, it opens and it's indefinite. Until you get the the meeting where they say it's closing. So
So you really don't know how much time you have necessarily to
never.
sub. Yeah.
No, you never do. And it goes,
That's some pins and needles. So.
And it goes by, like, I think I can't remember exactly, but I think it's quarters.
Okay.
So, like, let's say the show's open for 3 months, your first 3 months, then they look at the end of the quarter what your percentage of days you missed.
I see.
So I think on the last show I was like at 53 or 57. Well, it was percent, so it wasn't good. And it also, I think it also looks bad, because then they feel like, well, I hired this guy for the show, but we can't count on him being there about half the time,
Sure.
So I think that was detrimental too, in retrospect. But I couldn't really do anything, because the store was in really kind of dire straits at that time. So
was that about a year ago? I think it was about a year ago. You and I were on the phone.
Longer. Well, it was in dire straits for quite a while.
Oh, okay. so anytime I've talked with you, it's
pretty
you've
much
been involved with
bad.
Okay.
Yeah, unless you talk to me in November or December. So, but I mean, we're getting things, it was new to both of us that own the store, being in that business and running a business that's a small business privately and
Sure.
everything else. So it's been a lot of learning on all sides of things that are all like, okay, well, don't do that anymore, So we've learned
Right.
a lot of things. It's running a lot more smoothly. A lot of the things we know to do, know not to do, all that kind of stuff. So it's in I think a much better spot than it ever has been. So um and it's enjoyable. It's I don't necessarily think about music while I'm there, or music work.
Sure.
And it's fun, like people are asking, a lot of things you gotta that you need to know about wine, and you have to be able to tell them. And it's interesting. It's an interesting subject to me, and I'm always you know going to a lot of wine, as many wine tastings as I can, and distributor tastings and all kinds of stuff, just to try to first of all find cool, interesting stuff for the store, and also just for my general knowledge of that stuff.
Has the store been kind of necessary in the process of not falling back into the situation you were in Phoenix, where you're just taking everything and then you're just ending up on gig after gig, which is like, last minute changes, and just ultimately just shitty gigs? Because I mean, it's easy to like fall back into old patterns even in another city, where it's just like, okay, this, I know this world, I know how these things work. Great, where is it here? So has like the store kind of taken the pressure off of having to take every gig all the time?
Well, that was the idea, really.
Yeah,
Financially,
sure.
it hasn't necessarily been that, but because I haven't really been able to pay myself, out of that. Because usually I end up, like, if there's something extra left over or whatever, put it back into the store, even be it
Right.
like, new refrigerators or better inventory or some artwork for the store, or a new computer, or you name it. Usually the money goes back into making it a better
Sure.
store. It doesn't necessarily do that for the gigs. Um, the gig situation here for me, I mean, I haven't ever really gotten into the club date scene, or like casuals,
Yeah.
here, because, well, first of all, a lot of it's been going away.
Sure.
Um, a lot of it, and a lot of times you have to have a car. Um, you have to sing sometimes. I mean, it helps. All those things help. So, like, if you don't have a car, you're kind of stuck, like, bumming rides from people, because a lot of things are in New Jersey or Long Island or Westchester, or wherever. Like, minimal things in Manhattan. There
Sure.
are some. There are some, but those are the prime ones that the guys that work for the agency a lot, I'm sure, get first shot at. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I haven't ever really gotten into that scene here. So most of the stuff I've been doing here has either been Broadway stuff or related stuff, with people from that world.
Sure.
Like club, some club shows or concerts, or all things like that, with or tours, whatever, with people that are from that world. Um,
I mean, from what I hear out here from guys that have like spent time back there or kind of came up there and then eventually moved here or whatever, like that, the Broadway scene is like, that's the scene. Like that's the working scene.
well, it is now. I mean, I think, from what I know about the scene and the guys that I play with that have been here for a long time, it wasn't, certainly years ago.
Sure.
It was certainly more of, there was a lot of studio stuff. A guitar player that I played some shows with, he turned down a really popular show that ran for probably 5 or 6 years, because he was still doing too many jingle sessions
Mm, right.
uh, to make it worthwhile playing a Broadway show. And so, but the next time he got called for one, that didn't happen.
Yeah.
So, but so I think a lot of it's changed a lot. A lot of the guys that are in the Broadway scene now have all been. I mean, a lot of the older players, I would say, have had careers doing a lot of studio stuff, touring with big singers or big acts or whatever. Um, but they were in it was a different scene then, and Broadway was like, you know, down the echelon of gigs. And as other things went away, as not that many people are out touring anymore, and not that many people are recording, film stuff isn't really happening much here. There's always a little bit of all those things for certain
Sure.
people, but it's certainly not as widespread as it was. I think all those people that were doing things like that are playing, Broadway stuff now. So,
What's technology been like in the pit? Is there a bunch of tracks? Do you play the tracks? Is it all live guys or women? I'm not being an asshole. Is it live musicians, or is there pre-recorded stuff that's been brought in?
well, in my experience, and it's not. That's certainly not everything, because there are some things that have been union issues and challenged a little bit by the union and players and things, which I'm not real up on, because I try to, since the store, if I'm not in music stuff, I'm busy with the store stuff.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Choose your headache.
yeah, exactly.
It's either small business or union. Like, well,
Yeah. So it's like, then while they're talking about that, it shouldn't be legal or whatever. And I absolutely agree if that's the
sure.
case. But it's like, well, I'm losing money at the moment at the store, so I don't have time for that. So,
Right.
In my experience, it has not been any playing with any pre-records. It's all been live, with the exception of occasionally. Sound effects always.
Sure.
That kind of thing is there's, so sometimes you're playing with a click track that has some sound effects. Also, sometimes if it's not possible to have like the ensemble singing behind something because they're changing clothes at that moment, sometimes they'll pre-record like some ensemble vocal, like harmony stuff. But it's certainly not
That's
much
cast related, but not necessarily pit related.
Yeah, no pit related stuff that's pre-recorded. It's all been live. And like I said, the only things that are on a click track because of triggering sound effects and some possible vocal cues. Like I said, the cast, it's impossible for the cast to get to because of, for whatever reason, they're changing or they're whatever. So so I mean, none of that's really changed in the 10 plus 15 years that I've been doing it. So
okay. Now I forgot what year it was, but I remember the first year you landed the Rockettes, and that's I'm gonna let you speak about it because all I know about it is what you've told me. So I'm gonna let you talk about the audition process, all that. But you landed it 2 or 3 years in a row.
Yeah, it was. Well, the first year that they auditioned was the year that I moved here, but I wasn't really aware of it. It was kind of a thing they invited certain people to. So I ended up subbing for the person that there was 2 people that split the chair every year. So I ended up subbing for one of the 2 people, or maybe effectively probably both of the people, but it was somebody that I was subbing on a Broadway show for.
Okay.
So because of that, I found out about what the gig was in the audition. And so then the next year, you could send a resume in to audition for it. And because, probably because I had played like 40 shows the previous season, I got an audition spot for it. And I don't know, it was maybe 15 or 18 people, something like that. And
the same book? Is it the same book every year?
Essentially, yeah. I mean, sometimes they'll have like one or two new songs. I think they had put in quite a few new songs the first year that they did the auditions for. I mean, it's weird. It's they auditioned for part of the orchestra. Part of the orchestra still had their jobs from years ago. It's a real kind of mess of a situation. But
Okay. I mean, it's
anyway, I
really
won't
just
even
like a
go
holiday cash
into
cow,
that.
right?
Yeah, it's
Yeah, it's just
basically
like
2 months
we're just
worth
gonna
of
make a ton of money while everybody comes to New York for
right.
Christmas.
Yeah, exactly. So then they send you. You had to play a solo piece on each instrument, electric and acoustic, and then they give you an excerpt from the show to play on each instrument as well. And so that's it. It's like 4 pieces. You have to play. You play the 2 pieces from the show with a click track because the whole show is clicked. One was like the a piece of the Nutcracker on a double bass, and then the other one was this like kind of pop tune on electric bass.
And who picked the solo? Were you allowed to pick your own solo pieces?
You can pick your own solo piece, yeah.
How did you go about that? Like, did you get inside your head? I would get inside my head. Like, well, what the hell do they want to hear? What's in the style of the thing? Like, if I do
Yeah.
this, are they even going to recognize that as something that's, relevant as a bass player to be playing this? Or, like, should I kind of cater this to, who I'm aiming the audition at? Like, how'd you go about picking the pieces, I guess is my question.
Well, I mean, I went kind of back and forth for a while about it. Yeah, trying to figure out what do I think they want to hear,
Sure.
And like for electric bass solo, it's like, what do you want to hear for sure? So,
but it's interesting because you have all this stuff worked out that we'll get to in this version too.
yeah. So I mean,
you have like more than enough material worked out for solo electric bass. It's just like, are they going to dig James by Pat Metheny?
Right. And I thought
Rockettes?
about that. Yeah, and I thought about that too. And also like the excerpt from the show that they sent to play is something that was just like loaded with articulations.
Okay.
So, I mean, I felt like I tried to pick. I mean, thankfully I had the luxury of a few basses at the time to choose which one I thought sounded the best for that, or that maybe was the easiest to play all those articulations. And that was like this Sadowski bass that I have that's basically like a 70s jazz bass.
Okay.
That it's extremely crisp and clear. And so anything with the articulation, it just like, I mean, it almost articulates itself, if you kind of do it.
Yeah.
Compared to like the other options, which was a 62p bass, which that doesn't it's it'd sound fine for me, but it wouldn't be that articulated.
It's not that sound, yeah.
It's not that kind of thing. So then I picked the only tune that I really had down already, because it's like they give you like a month or so, which is plenty of time to get something together. But I tried to think about the style of the show, and not thinking that it's going to be judged on music,
right?
Which was probably a good call. It wasn't like, am I going to play like some ballad thing on electric and have them enjoy it? No, it's not going to be like that. I tried to pick something that's more, thankfully having played the show before and know it's like an hour and a half of spectacular.
Right, kind of some high energy stuff.
Yeah, and it's like, everybody's playing constantly and as many notes as you can write. So I picked like a fast solo piece that I had worked out on 4-string. That it's the Horace Silver tune, Sister Sadie.
Oh yeah, I love that tune.
So I had a version of that worked out where it's, or maybe I worked it out for that. I think I worked it out for that, but it was kind of a tune that I had messed around with trying to do a solo version. So I did it where it's, really fast, and there's a bunch of walking and some soloing and stuff that sounds hard and fast and loud. So I thought, well, that's kind of the right style for it. So that was
Yeah.
that was the electric piece. And then I was trying to figure out something like that to do for acoustic bass, and there was a tune that Rufus Reed plays on one of his records. That's a Sam Jones tune. He also played it on there was a recording he did with Michael Moore, where
Bass Day '98. I've seen that.
Yeah.
I just remember T for Two from that video.
Yeah, that's a cool one.
Yeah.
But the video is long, and then they do a bunch of different tunes. But one of the tunes is called Seven Minds.
Okay.
It's a Sam Jones tune, and it has kind of a cool intro thing where you can play some chords, and then a thing where it does like root fifth and octave up and down the neck, and then the head of the tune is like down in half position, and it's a lot of open strings with like one fingered note on each string or something. So it sounds like you're playing a bunch of stuff, and you're just playing like open and
Okay.
And so I mean, it kind of lays well. Of course, it was written by a bass player, so it should lay well on the bass. So
sure.
it's so I did that tune, because you can walk a little bit in it, and it's kind of soloistic, and it's like flashy, kind of. I mean, not in a bad way, but
It's showcasing.
It is. So I picked those. So I picked those two tunes. That's how.
Okay.
Because they were both like up tempo, kind of showy, like I said, but not just musicless.
Right.
So yeah, I picked those, and it worked. So I got the gig for that year, and then maybe the 3 years after that as well. So it was maybe 4 in a row.
Okay.
And then then 1 year, one of the people that had won the chair that I split the book with 1 year asked me how I was always getting the gig, and so he asked me if he could play his audition stuff for me. So he did, and I helped him out and changed around the fingering. He played the electric excerpt on, and we talked about his solo stuff and how I approached it and what so he picked a different solo thing, and we talked all about it and went through all the bowing on the classical excerpt, and then when the audition came up, I went in, and for some reason, whatever that day, just played horribly bad and didn't get the gig that year, and he did. So, but it wasn't like I didn't feel like I taught him how to beat me. I taught him how to win it, but
sure.
I think, but I lost it, for myself.
Right,
but
right.
There's two chairs ultimately, so
right.
But I don't feel like I did anything wrong by helping him. Because I went in and played horribly, so that was just my fault that year. So, and then I won it again the next year.
Okay.
But
is this still something you've been doing since then? So that's
no,
5 years total.
No, I haven't. Well, now November and December are the biggest months of the store, so I can't really be busy with other things during that time. So a couple of the years I did the year after I won it, after I won it last, I had a tour in China with the guy named Jeremy Stoll. He plays Phantom a lot of the nights in Phantom of the Opera.
Okay, man, I'm does he tour like kind of his own thing? I might have just saw him at Catalina's like maybe 8 months ago.
He does tour his own thing, and that's kind of how I went to China with him a couple of tours.
But his band wasn't happening. Now that would be awful if the bass player from that tour is listening to this, but whatever. I don't know if he was in.
I don't think he was at Catalina though. I don't.
There may be a different guy who. It might be the guy who tours with Phantom.
I don't
know.
I mean, Phantom's been around since
Yeah.
I don't even really know.
Right.
Since
I don't know the history of any
the
of that stuff.
1700s or something.
Yeah.
So
Right.
anyway, no, it's been around like 30 years. But anyway, there's everybody. There's been a gazillion people play the Phantom on Broadway and to a million tours and in London, and so there's a lot of people that use that as part of their thing. But my friend Jeremy, he's been in the show for 10 years, so he doesn't always play the Phantom, but a lot of nights he does, and so he put together his own group of two more singers and then a three-piece band, and we've done a few tours in China and some gigs around the States as well.
Nice. So you go to China a lot. Did they just love the Broadway thing? Did they love the American Broadway music?
Not as much as I would say Korea or Japan, but
Okay.
I think they're starting to. I mean, I think the tour that we went over with was sponsored by the government, so it was a thing to kind of expose people to that stuff instead of satisfying a fan base. It was more of like maybe building one, something like that.
Interesting.
But the last thing was just purely, booked when I did the Dreamgirls in December and January in China. That was just a regular show that was booked there, and it was well attended, very big theater.
Nice.
And then we did it in Tokyo for 3 weeks, and that was more well attended because they've been into the Broadway stuff, quite a bit more longer.
Okay. There's a couple gigs I very specifically remember going to check you out on. There was one with a tenor player. I might get his name wrong. Jeff Morrison.
Oh yeah.
It was like me and Dan Mock came to like this little restaurant wine bar you were playing. I remember that one. Whatever that Chuck Moronic church was out in Scottsdale. You remember that place? It was like kind of I forgot whatever kind of
the one that Chuck was real involved in was the one in Fountain Hills. But there's also one that was like in between Indian School and Thomas. It was just off of Indian School Road, maybe 64th Street or 68th Street, 64th, maybe something like that.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. And there was some kind of name. It was like a Thursday night thing or something.
Yeah. It was like in the banquet hall of the church.
Right. So I remember two gigs there. One was I think just you and Barb.
Oh.
Playing a lot of your stuff.
Oh, yes.
I think I remember one of those.
You remember more than I do.
Oh man, I have a funny story. When Barb moved here. Like she was calling me for this church gig she was MDing for.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I love Barb. Yeah. And so I showed up. I'm like, yeah, of course. And I'm getting it. Go to the gig, and I would chew gum in the car, on the way to the gig. I'm like whatever, chewing gum. I get there, like I play the gig like I don't know a week or two. Barb calls me. She's like, hey, the minister, whatever title they had at a Episcopalian church. Whatever the main person title is,
right?
Preacher, whatever, administrator. Yeah, they kind of like, can you just not with the gum, I'm like, oh yeah, my bad, Barb, my bad. Like, won't happen again. I don't want to make you look bad. Cool, no gum. Whatever. Like the next week or 2 weeks later, I'm doing the gig again. I'm chewing gum. I get fired for chewing gum. Barb calls me back.
Oh my God!
And now it wasn't on Barb, and I have no ill will towards Barb at all. I love Barb, but Barb's like, yeah, like they kind of want someone who sings and who's Episcopalian. I'm like, yeah, I don't do either of those, but it's kind of about the gum, isn't it? She's like, yeah, it's a little bit about the gum. I got fired for chewing gum.
Damn.
Yeah. Whatever. Barb's great.
Wow.
Barb's great.
Yeah, it was like the 1960s.
Yeah. So that was one of the gigs I remember, and then there was another one. I think it was some young kid from Prescott on drums. I forgot his name. And I think it was Moronic on piano and Fred playing trumpet. And I don't even know or kind of care what tune you were playing.
And
But I
I was
remember the
playing.
two.
I was playing with Moronic.
I think you were playing with Moronic. You might have resolved your differences for 2 hours.
Wow. If so, during those 2 hours, it all came back.
I thought it was Moronic. Maybe it was Charles Lewis.
Maybe. Go ahead, and I'll try to remember.
Okay. But all I remember is there was a young kid from Prescott who was like the Young Sounds guy or something at the time. He could play,
Okay.
but he played really loud. I remember that.
Oh.
And but I remember you were playing specifically. You had like all this really lyrical over the bar line stuff. And I remember that from however many years ago that was. Where'd you get it? Because like if I listen to Dave Holland now, and and I can hear like, okay, he's playing 3 against 4, and I can hear how that all works out now. Back then, I couldn't hear that that's what that was. When you were doing that stuff, what was the concept? What was the rhythmic thing that you were kind of building it off of? I mean, not that specific night,
Right.
like who knows what that happened, but
right.
when playing,
in general,
polyrhythms and over the bar line ideas, where does it come from?
I was probably either rushing or dragging.
On a good night, both.
Or a combination of the two. Yeah. It was probably an accident. Yeah. Fighting with the bass, could have been part of it. No, thanks for remembering.
Sure. No, I mean, that had a huge impact on me. I went searching recordings, trying to find material like that to transcribe and get into. Like, man, where's all this shit coming from?
I don't know. The only thing I could possibly...
Do you think about it in a polyrhythmic sense?
I don't.
Are you just thinking about the line?
Yeah.
Okay.
Some of these it's funny. I was watching like a video, on Instagram today for just a minute with this amazing bass player in New York, Reggie Young, and he was being interviewed on the Scott's bass lessons thing.
Okay.
And he was talking about taking a lesson with Patitucci, and him saying that he, the phrasing of his solos, and he was asking Patitucci about how he got that kind of phrasing in his vocabulary. And he said it was from listening to, everybody but bass players, horn players, and everybody else, and
Sure.
all these kind of things. And the funny thing is, one of the people he mentioned was Dexter Gordon, that he really liked, and that's always been one of the people that I really, really loved. And he was kind of a master of that. Mm-hmm. I also loved Art Farmer and Tom Harrell, and people that played like real lyrical things like that kind of didn't necessarily, they kind of made you forget that the changes are going by and the bar lines are going by and all that kind of thing. Especially Dexter Gordon, with the way he had the elastic time feel thing,
and sometimes would sit so far back.
It sometimes sits so far back that then he owed you a beat,
Right.
But no one cared.
I've experimented with that on the bass, and that's interesting to communicate on the bass.
It is, and I think partly that's a register issue. If you do that too low, I think it throws a wrench into the works. But I think if you do that in the right register, it comes off as what it's supposed to be.
And I think the electric's a little bit more forgiving with it than the upright is.
It is.
And
I think so. I think you're right. Yes.
But there's something just about maybe because how physical the instrument is and how much string you have to move to produce a sound. That to go too far back on it, you really you can lose it all in a nanosecond.
Yeah, or you can pull things down, from like, it depends on, also it depends on of course it always does, but who you're playing with.
Sure.
Um, it also, I think, depends on how many people are accompanying what you're doing.
Hmm.
Um, like if there's a strong enough thing going on, you can pull on it. But
Sure.
if the people that they're sometimes it sounds like people still don't know what to do behind bass solos. Other than
Piano
talk.
players more often than not. I mean, that's
What's that? I'm sorry.
my personal experience is piano players more often than not. Guitar players are pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, I mean,
It's really piano players, and maybe they just have too much in front of them, and they have to touch it all. I don't know, but they try to. And it's like, man,
see, I'm a personal fan of like, I like people playing a lot of stuff behind my solos.
oh really?
Yeah, and I
Okay,
think I think everybody's very different with that. And I
sure.
remember, growing up, people that were like older than me. I would tell people like, hey man, feel free to play whatever you want behind my solo. It frees me up a little bit. And they're like, oh well, so and so told me not to play very much. And so
Sure.
I feel like with bass players, maybe more than almost any other instrument, it's such a personal preference about what gets played as comping behind you. Like a horn player, if like the piano player is comping or guitar player is comping and the drummer and bass player playing whatever, it's kind of expected of you. I mean, occasionally the real intense thing where people lay out and let the drummer and sax player just play by themselves.
Sure.
Other cliche kind of instances of circumstance, but for the most part, it's like it's everybody kind of has their own role to do behind that. But behind a bass solo, it's kind of up for grabs. Like if the drummer starts clicking the stick on the hi-hat pole, it's
Right.
like, oh my god, are you serious? But there's a time and a place for that, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, context is always you can't alleviate context.
Exactly.
Um,
But I mean, in terms of drummers, it's like all of a sudden, if for me, I hate it when and this is just me, for instance,
sure.
like when drummers are playing and they're playing all this cool shit behind other people, like maybe behind the piano solo, and then when the bass solo starts, they start playing just on the hi-hat and really quietly. I'm like,
Right.
how do you expect me to get, I mean, I should be able to get stuff going regardless of whoever's playing or
Right.
what they're playing. But I can't. I need help.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, whether it's a lot or a little, the idea of like we're still accompanying.
Yeah, exactly.
And I feel like I get frustrated when I feel, and it's immediate. As soon as I can feel someone like, go away from their post, where
Right. Yeah,
they're
they
not
start
on watch
checking out.
anymore. Yeah, you can just feel it instantly,
Yeah,
and that's what I hate. Like I don't care what you do, as long as you're mindful of the music and it's a musical decision. Cool. Then
exactly.
we can all do something with that. But if you check out, and of course I have completely checked out on other people's stuff. Um, so I'm not like just firing at others here. Like I've definitely done it.
Yeah.
Um, but I like still be engaged as if you're accompanying a soloist that's a horn player, a tenor player, trumpet player, whatever,
Yeah,
who's
exactly.
sitting
Like,
on top of the band. Just because my register is down here doesn't mean like we're still not. This is still cooperative music.
exactly. You have to think about what can I provide to the moment, that you're
Yeah.
in. And
Right.
and and who knows what that is. And like I've told that to piano players too. And it's not like I need to tell these guys what to play, because obviously they're, a lot of times great players. But sometimes they feel like their hands are tied during bass solos because of maybe something somebody else has told them. And so for me, I
Mm,
always try to say, I'm okay with you playing whatever you feel like. That's like,
sure.
you know, like
Right.
if
Don't paint by numbers under the bass
right,
solo. Yeah.
and like, like I hired you because I like the way you play, and
Sure.
so I want you to play, and I don't want you to like, if you want to play a lot behind my solo, then do it. I'll react. If you want to play a little in the beginning, what however it goes. I want
Yeah.
it to be, I want it to be reactionary regardless. I
Sure.
want it just to be real. That's all,
Right. Right. Where
And
you're still in it. You're not just doing this thing because it's the
right,
bass
yeah,
solo.
yeah,
Right.
exactly. And I told piano players, like, look, if I'm in the upper register and you want to walk or play a bass line, do it.
Yeah.
It's great because now I don't have to play, a certain way. I can change how I play and play differently. Same with the drummers. Like, if I want to hear a lot of, I want to hear a lot of stuff behind me because I feel like we're taking it somewhere instead of just, the campy bass solo down low on my own playing the blues. It's not that interesting to me, and I don't think it is to other people. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many jokes about bass solos. So,
Sure.
I don't know, man. So I guess to answer your original question, I um, to have some support is a big thing, uh, but which is also interesting in the trio thing that I do. That's just horn and bass and drums.
Right.
I have to make that work without that, and that's taken some getting used to. So for me, that involves like occasionally me playing a chord type solo to keep. I feel like it keeps the tune on the rails instead of just
Okay.
playing a single note solo. And I think because somebody else is not playing the chords, if I play like a cool rhythm and chord thing during the solo, or like I guess ends up being a chord solo, then I think it keeps the tune on the rails a little bit more for when I do play the single note stuff
Sure.
through the changes. So I think if I kind of go back and forth between both and find that happy medium, I think it you're not missing anything and it serves the purpose. But like I said, the drummer has to be playing some interesting stuff behind me. And thankfully, like I said, the guy that I hired in Tokyo from my own gig back in February, certainly capable of doing that.
Yeah.
And he felt that. He went everywhere I went, he was right there, man.
Sure.
And if things got busier, he lit it up behind me, and it was just bass and drums, and it was great. It was exactly what it was exactly the kind of playing behind that kind of odd situation that it was absolutely perfect. So,
Sure. I
and
talk
then
about that a lot, actually. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
and he, he also like he loves to, I was like, what do you like to do solo wise? I mean, do you like fours, do you like eights, do you like to just play, chorus by yourself, or what do you want to do? And some of the tunes like that I had written had like a vamp to it, where I was like, I'll play the vamp and you solo over it, and then we'll come back in with the head. So we did that. He's like, yeah, fine, I don't care, anything's fine. And I was like, perfect. So like some tunes, I would play kind of along with him, even like kind of on a balladish tune, like Child Is Born. I would kind of play along with him and let him play like basically a chorus, and then also like now I'm accompanying the drum solo.
Yeah.
So the drum solo maybe is more interesting to people because it's referenced in the tune instead of just by itself.
No, I'm
And
a
then
big advocate of that also, like accompanying the drum solo. And so if
yeah,
there's like, a cliche rhythm or a specific hit, within a tune, like,
yeah, exactly. I
like
know exactly what you
let's
mean.
say 500 miles high, right? There's that big line at the end. But da-da-da-da-da.
Right,
So if you only do that hit every time, okay, cool. Well, now let's start moving that hit around within the tune
right,
and give him something to work with. And if you
right,
keep it that way for a couple courses, he'll catch it. Then then you nudge it around on it to keep it interesting for him, and us too. But it's becomes this cooperative. The chordal player is going to jump on it.
hmm
We're going to start messing with it. So it's not just like, all right, well, here you go, 32 bars of a bunch of stuff I don't know, and then come back in on a on an A minor chord, whatever.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think all that changes the listener experience. To me, it
Sure.
does. Those are always more interesting things. Um, because it sounds like the tune is still going on.
Right.
So, but so we did do some things where we traded fours, where we would trade eights, or he'd play. We would do like eights for a while, and then he did a whole chorus, and then the next tune we would do a thing where like I said, he was soloing over a vamp or something, and I think all those things just make it to where the set of tunes all has like, well, that was different. Oh, that was different, instead of
Yeah.
like, here's something totally similar. So I think it's great that way. And the way, again, the way he approaches playing behind bass solos, or the way I hope people approach playing behind bass solos, is like, it should be that way. It shouldn't be like, okay, every time I go tank, tank to tang on the hi-hat stand, and just
Right.
let the bass player go. Um, there's only so much of that I would want to hear,
Sure.
and it's only a few seconds, honestly. But it was it's not that's not interesting to me, man.
Right.
It's like the drummer has to play the tune for the bass player to play a solo if it's going to work. And in this case, like I said, without having a chordal instrument behind me, now I have to kind of think of my solo a little differently. I have to, how am I going to make this interesting for me and the people listening? If I just play a single note and hold it,
Right.
there's nothing going on other than the drummer. And like I said, thankfully, if he can make something happen, you can do it. So you can do all those things if the people are accompanying it the right way. But sometimes it involves talking to people about it, like having a discussion about it. The best is when you never have to discuss it, but that doesn't always happen, and it doesn't mean it's bad. It just means somebody told them to not do something, and you have to tell them it's okay to do something. So
it's best when the synergy is just naturally there and everybody's coming from a similar place.
absolutely. Yeah.
And I used to do this gig on Wednesdays, and literally nobody was there, but it was probably the most fun I've had in a long time playing. Um, it was this guitar kind of power trio ish. Like, we do some Schofield stuff, we do some Charlie Hunter, we do like Tears for Fears, but in 15. But then we would just straight
I
up
can't even
play
count
like,
that high.
yeah. But then we would just like straight up play Happy Trails, in and out, like no solos at all.
Yeah.
And the band was amazing because we could cover a lot of ground. It was so much fun.
Nice.
And we're all coming from this kind of similar place, and it was a lot of fun. But then if we would talk about it, I love the talking about it, because there's maybe things I don't know. Like, okay, both of you guys are great, the other two guys in the group, but what do you prefer? You can do that, and you can do the other thing too, but what do you prefer? Okay, great. I don't care. I have no allegiance to either, setting up a vamp for you to solo over or playing through the form. Like, what do you prefer to tell your story?
Yeah, exactly.
So if it's a simple thing like that, I would always prefer to know what's going to make them, where they're coming from, even deeper. Like, cool, you can play the instrument, great, and we're working together, great. But what's your preference? Okay, great, let's do that.
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, I would say, I mean, I think this is huge, a huge point to make. And I don't know, maybe you agree from your experience of talking to people about it too, but the best time to discuss that is not on the bandstand.
No,
The best
never.
the best time to discuss that is like over coffee or beer or
Right.
something.
After you just played a gig, but knowing
Yeah.
you have another one coming up. So
Yeah.
it's like everything that just happened, cool.
And
Great.
they're like,
Let's
then
make next time better.
yeah, on the bandstand, it's a weird situation like that, because it's harder to speak, maybe harder to speak freely.
Sure.
I don't know. I'm not sure what it is. I just think like there's no, it's, yeah, at that point it's not a rehearsal, it's not a gig, it's just a discussion. So
Right.
I think like over a beer, it's like, well, since you asked, yeah, actually this would be cool, that kind of
Right.
thing, instead of being like, I don't know, should I say something? Or
Yeah.
that kind of thing. I think it's
Yeah, and
best,
I think being
you know.
proactive about asking, there's nothing wrong with like asking the people. Like,
No, it's
I don't feel like
I've
an asshole
always
if I go to a drummer like, dude, how do you like to blow? Do you like vamps? You want to just take it, and you'll bring us all back in. Like, what's your thing? What are you into? Like, that's fine. Like,
right,
if
exactly, and that was
if you feel comfortable enough to bring your fullness to it, it's only going to improve all of us. So like, just let me know what it is.
yeah, and I want you to be happy. So
Right. Exactly.
exactly, that's why like when I played with June in Tokyo, it's the first thing I said, like, how do you like to do this, and he was like, however you want to do it, so I was like, well, great, well, we'll make it different each tune.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and I think because of that, everybody gets a better experience, playing and listening. I think so.
To circle back, about the guy that was talking to Scott on Scott's bass lessons about Patitucci and his phrasing.
Oh
I
yeah.
was at the lesson with Patitucci and I was talking to him about melodic playing, and records to check out, and I want to hear it from him. I want to give me some records, man. Give me some records to check out for the Brazilian thing. Like, just drop me a ton of records to go check out. Like, that was part of that lesson. It was just give me a ton of records to check out.
That's cool. That's something a lot of
Because
people never ask.
Like, that's where you got it. So like, if I want to like get into this thing to the level that you've gotten into this thing, that's it. There's only one way, and I think it's the record, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing with all the transcribing. Anyways, he dropped me one specific Miles Davis solo. He's like, yeah, man, check that out, transcribe that. I'm like, okay. So went home, transcribed it, and then I got really into it, and then like my entrepreneurial brain kicked in. I'm like, well, I'm gonna just transcribe a shit ton of Miles, and sell it to Hal Leonard. Like, that was my idea, and so I did. I didn't. Hal Leonard wasn't interested. But I have a folder full of Miles transcriptions.
Really?
Yeah, and I did. I went deep, man. Like, I checked out everything. Like, I wasn't gonna record his solo off of Kinda Blue or,
right.
The cliche stuff is like this old him and Jackie McLean playing Dr. Jackal.
Oh wow.
He plays this really cool solo. That's every chorus of the blues is kind of different, but they all relate. And so he almost approaches the solo in like this vignette concept, which is ridiculously fascinating.
Yeah.
Just conceptually, which, I mean, that's Miles's thing. Technique-wise, there's cracked notes all over the place.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, but man, like, the concept for it was so deep that like every chorus was kind of standalone. And then they all kind of wrapped up towards the end. I think there's 8 of them. But yeah, he had me do Miles, and he had me. He talked about Dexter. So,
really?
like, on the plane ride back, like I was checking out. I think it's either Go or Our Man in Paris.
Yeah,
Where
I
they
know
play
both of those very well.
Willow Weep for Me, and I was gonna transcribe Dexter's solo on Willow Weep for Me.
Interesting.
Because when, I mean, the problem with horn players is like it basically has to be a ballad or like super medium, because they're gonna double up on that shit.
Right.
And then, which is just almost impossible to get out on the bass.
Right. Yeah.
So I was just listening
and see,
to a bunch of...
that was the thing I found. Sorry to interrupt for a second, but that's the thing
ahead.
I found about Dexter, especially to check out some of the later Dexter, because he got to a more approachable technical level of what is transferable to the bass. I mean, without everybody can play the giant step solo on the bass or whatever, and it's all the technical stuff, whatever. But what I'm saying is, like, stuff that, like, I think sounds appropriate on the bass, and I think Rufus Reid plays that way largely as well. And that's how I kind of found Dexter Gordon, is like I was searching for records that Rufus Reid was on.
Right, and he was playing with Rufus. But I know that there's some stuff around like the late 80s. I don't know when Dexter passed. But I know that there's a bunch of stuff with Rufus and Dexter in the late 80s.
I think it's actually like maybe the early '80s. It was like
Okay.
'79 through '82 or '3.
Oh, okay.
But there's a lot of stuff that a lot of live stuff that actually I had on CD that I don't think I've seen in a long time. But there's a great, there's a couple of great records. There's a Carnegie Hall concert that is that band. It's Rufus Reid, Eddie Gladden on drums, and George Cables on piano. And it was a Carnegie Hall concert. There's also a studio album from similar time called Manhattan Symphony, which is really great, actually. And I mean, it's Dexter's playing is really laid back and not intense. You know, the stuff like Our Man in Paris and all that's like 20 years before that. And it's definitely more like powerful, like intense playing. And
Sure.
the other one is like more relaxed, like the way he speaks, you know.
Yeah, I mean, but there's so much. There's the sign of the times. Like, I don't know off the top of my head what year those records were cut. Our Man in Paris or Go. Maybe early 60s, late 50s.
60s, yeah, 60s, early 60s, I believe.
So there's a lot of aggressive jazz happening at that time, and there's
Right.
a lot of it's an aggressive, combative culture
Right.
for a Black American.
Yeah.
So there's all that, you know. There's a lot of the times that's and he's younger. You
True.
move into the 80s, he's older, and things have. I mean, I can't speak to the race struggle clearly at all, firsthand. Like, I don't
Yeah.
know what that was like for him at that point in the 80s, but the 80s were a little bit more relaxed. They weren't as aggressive and politically charged
Well, and at that point,
as the 60s with civil rights.
exactly. And at that point, he had just moved back. He had moved back to New York, and was an older guy, you know. So
Yeah.
I mean, the perspective he's coming at everything from is different, and that for me, that's my favorite Dexter era. But that's just because that's the first era that I heard, because those were the
Sure.
albums with Rufus. But I did go back and listen to the older stuff, and I love it too. But what I love is the way he plays when he's older, you know. And it's you know, he could take a solo that was 15 minutes long, and it didn't have like that. You couldn't draw that. Here's the typical solo where it starts really low and then it builds up to a climax and then it goes
Right.
down. You know? It didn't have that. It had a thing that was deeper than that. That's this long thing where it kind of ramps up and then it takes a right turn and then it goes for a while. And then it ramps up and then it takes a left turn. You know, it's like,
Okay, it's a lot more patient.
It had this thing where it could just like, you have a sense of like, it never would end, you know, and it doesn't have to, because it holds your interest the whole time for different reasons. And his timing and the way he plays on those albums of that era, it has that phrasing, that loose, where the rhythm section's just burning, man, like beneath it, and he just plays on top of it, you know.
Nice.
And it just glides on top of it, you know. It's those are some of my favorite records in terms of I did transcribe some of it. You know, to be honest, I hate transcribing, but I really do. But I did transcribe some of his solos on that, like on some blues, and the way he plays over the blues, because everybody's so, you know, connected to the blues and making the changes and all this stuff that, you know, you're taught in school.
Sure.
The way he plays over the blues, I'm like, man, he doesn't do any of that stuff. He's like, I mean, he does, he can, but he doesn't always. And that was the best of the learning experience of, like, maybe the playing over the bar and the looser thing like that. Is like, you have to be able to do that, but you don't need to do that, you know.
All right. So I'm sure you're wondering why there's kind of an abrupt ending there. There's an abrupt ending there because there was something, what he said about school and like cutting the changes and what you learn in school. that was kind of still stuck in the back of my mind as we were continuing to talk. And then I took the conversation back to school, and then the conversation just didn't have the same kind of arc to it anymore. It got it went somewhere else, and I liked the note. I like kind of the tone of the conversation. That was where I ended it. So that was the reason for that abrupt ending. I think this is the second episode in a row with like kind of just a strong cutoff ending. Right? The last one was Jim Kerwin. He's just like gear and then I cut it there. I thought that was hilarious. That's why I did that one. If you are enjoying the abrupt endings and you're enjoying me cutting tracks really short at the end and losing files, you can consider donating to the Basshed Podcast. Basshed.com/podcast. There's a donate there. Just, whatever it's worth to you. If you want to contribute to keep this thing going, much appreciated. Shoot me a note or an email with anything you would like me to read on the air. Any social media links, shout out to an album, a band, anything, whatever you're up to, a YouTube channel. Let me know what you're up to. And yes, I do, community is a big thing to me. Community is very important to me, not only because of what's going on in the world. It's always been a big, important thing to me. That kind of happened when I moved to Los Angeles, and I felt just this idea of all the musicians were so isolated. Either, now that maybe I was right. Maybe I was right about that, or just maybe I wasn't on the scene yet. You know what I mean? Like maybe I wasn't plugged in deep enough on the scene. I'm not sure. Looking back, I still think that there was definitely a time, and there still is a little bit of that happening, I think, in Los Angeles. Like there's a core group of guys I know that are great about just reaching out, checking in on people if they don't hear from someone in a long time, whatever. But ultimately, I do feel that in Los Angeles, this sense of isolation and stuff, and I've been trying since I've been here to do my part into uniting people, bringing them together. Jam sessions I've started, other music promotional nights for venues I've created. Community is a big deal. So I would love to rely on the community to keep this thing happening, and I will obviously, return the favor and use the platform to help you get your name out there and whatever you're up to. As a musician, this isn't bass specific, although I do typically do bass players. I typically interview bass players. That's a way better way to say that. All right, that's what I got, folks. I'm looking forward to having Steve back on the show, and I'm pretty sure we can make that happen. And that's what I got for this one. I'll catch you on the next one.